So now, in assessing an argument, we want to distinguish between two different questions, and I'm going to give you technical notions, two of them. One is the notion of validity. The other one is that of soundness. And I'm going to define an argument as valid, just in case there's no way for all the premises to be true and the conclusion false. Another way of putting that is, if all the premises are true, then the conclusion must be true as well. That does not, notice, imply that all the premises are in fact true. So an argument can be valid even if not all the premises are true. What validity comes to is an if-then kind of claim. If all the premises are true, then the conclusion must also be true too. But that's a big if on which a lot hangs. So validity is just the if-then statement, whereas soundness is different from that. Soundness is the argument is valid and all the premises are true. So soundness builds on the notion of validity. To be sound, an argument has to be valid, but it also has to have something else, namely true premises. And these are very abstract notions, and they're not going to be very intuitive for you just yet. But I want to try to put this idea to work in order to show how it's actually useful in the assessment of arguments. Okay? So remember that validity and soundness are both technical terms. They're not the same words that are used in everyday English or other natural languages, and we just want to focus on how we're going to be using those for our purposes of this course. Now, can we give an example of an argument that is valid but not sound? I said validity does not imply soundness, because you could have validity even if not all the premises are true. So here's an argument. Premise number 1, all 10-legged creatures have wings. Premise number 2, all spiders have 10 legs. Now, if those two premises are true, all spiders have 10 legs, and all 10-legged creatures have wings, what can we infer from that? Well, I think that we can infer that all spiders have wings. Now, that's strange because you know that not all spiders have wings. In fact, I don't know if I'm sure that most spiders don't have wings. Do any spiders have wings? I don't know the answer to that question. But it's certainly not true that all spiders have wings. So we know the conclusion's not true. But wait, this argument, I claim, is valid nonetheless, because it is the case that if, remember, it's a big if premise 1 and premise 2 are true, then the conclusion must be true as well. Think of it this way. If you were in a possible world in which premise 1 and premise 2 are both true, that would also be a world in which all spiders have wings. If you're in a world in which all spiders have 10 legs, and in that same world it was also the case that all 10-legged creatures have wings, you would also know that you're in a world in which all spiders have wings. That is to say, the argument's valid, which is cashed out as the idea that if the premises are true, the conclusion must be true as well. Again, I'm not saying the premises are true, I'm just saying if the premises are, then the conclusion must be true as well. Notice that we use hypothetical reasoning like this all the time. I'm going to say things like, if I were to take the bus, then I would get to the baseball game on time. It's no objection to me to say, but you weren't planning on taking the bus. I might say, but I'm just saying if. If that were the case, I'd be able to get to the game on time. For you to reply, I'm not planning on it, is not really relevant. Likewise, if the question is validity, we're just talking about if the premises are true, would the conclusion be true as well? And I'm suggesting that this argument is valid, but it's not sound. Why is it not sound? Well, let's go back to the definition of soundness. To be sound, you have to be both valid and have all true premises, and I think you can see that premises 1 and 2 are not all true. In particular, premise 2 is clearly not true. Let's try another application of our definitions of soundness and validity. Can we have an argument that has true premises but is not valid? Well, let's try this example. Premise number 1. If I owned all the gold in Fort Knox, I'd be rich. That seems true, and likewise, it also seems true that I don't own all the gold in Fort Knox. Let's look at those two premises. The conclusion is, consider the conclusion being, I'm not rich. Now, is this argument valid? The premises are true, but does the truth of the premises guarantee that the conclusion must be true as well? Well, no, because I might be rich in some other way, right? Perhaps I had a patent on something that everybody wants, and I get lots of royalties from it, something of the kind. That might be another way of becoming rich. So just because I didn't get richness, my wealth, in the way that involves having all the gold in Fort Knox does not guarantee that I'm not rich. There might be some other source of funds. So here's an example in which I've got true premises an argument, but still the argument is not valid. So just because you look at an argument and find that its premises are true does not show that the argument is a valid one. You need more. Okay? And this particular argument fallacy is known as the fallacy of denying the antecedent. Just because the antecedent of the if-then statement in number 1 is not true does not mean that the conclusion can't hold as well. Here's another example of the same general point that I'm trying to make here. Here's another example of an argument that has true premises but is still not valid. Premise number 1. If it rained last night, the streets are wet. Seems true. And it might also, let's suppose also that the streets are wet. So our two premises are true. Therefore, it rained last night. Let's think about this. We know that if it rained last night, the streets are wet, and we look outside and we say, yep, the streets are wet. Therefore, it rained last night. Is that a valid argument? Well, not according to our definition, because it might be the case that the streets are wet for some other reason. Premise 1 only tells us that if it rained last night, the streets are wet. But it doesn't mean that, in fact, that's what caused the wetness of the streets. Perhaps the street cleaning truck just came by and sprayed the streets down in the course of washing them and brushing them up and so forth. That might be why the streets are wet. That does not have to be the explanation. The rain, that is, does not have to be the explanation as to why it is the streets are wet. So we have now two examples of arguments that have true premises but are not valid. Okay. What about soundness? Here's an example of an argument that might be sound. Let's think about it. Premise 1, all mammals have lungs. 2, all whales are mammals. Therefore, conclusion, all whales have lungs. I'm fairly sure that the first premise is true. Let's suppose that it is, that all mammals have lungs. Premise 1. Premise 2, all whales are mammals. I'm suggesting that not only are both premises 1 and 2 true, but that if they're true, the conclusion has to be true as well. That's an example, a sort of paradigm example of a sound argument. Now, here's a question for you. Does soundness guarantee validity? Consider that for a moment.